Metacritic is under attack for its so-called Metascore on a regular basis, especially for its weighting system. So let's find out how accurate these scores really are, what impact they had on the industry so far, and if consumers even rely on them as much as it's often claimed. Before we begin, quick history lesson. Metacritic was launched in January of 2001 by Mark Doyley, his sister Julie Doyley Roberts, and Jason Dietz. Sites like Rotten Tomatoes already existed, but the three of them saw an opportunity to cover a broader range of media by dealing with criticism, TM apparently. In 2005 they sold it. From there it changed owners multiple times, finally ending up in the hands of Red Ventures. In a shocking new revelation of corporate incest, Fandom has announced the acquisition of the video game aggregator website Metacritic and a few others, to the detriment of their UI design. In the studio is our handsome corporate merger expert, specializing in corporate mergers. Nova, what do you think about these acquisitions? I think they should have waited another month, so I wouldn't have gotten this dumb idea of a skit that definitely didn't cause sleepless nights. Wow, thank you for this deep and unbiased analysis. Tune in next week when we discuss the Activision Blizzard acquisition of sexual misconduct. Now, let's talk about the several problems of Metacritic, starting with a statement that is so controversial that almost everyone agrees with it. Now, praise please, that's enough, right? End of story. Okay, there is far more to it. Let's take a more detailed look at the problems of creating a Metascore by going through the process of creating one ourselves. Step 1. To make our score, we first need to collect reviews from our trusted publications. The critics in question, however, can be positively or negatively influenced by previous iterations of a franchise, the genre, or its studio. Expectations, sometimes built by the developers themselves, can also grow so high that a game which under normal circumstances would be received well gets less favorable reviews because it couldn't keep up with those expectations. The opposite can also be the case where the public wants to hear what they expected, and if the reviewers say something different, the obvious solution is to write death threats, of course it is. In other words, some reviewers might be inclined to say what the public wants to hear. Reviews from people new to a franchise also get mixed up with reviews from fans of a game series. Despite you maybe only caring about the veterans' opinions, or maybe you're new to a franchise and more inclined to hear about a newcomer's perspective, no matter what, they all go into the same Metascore, which in my humble opinion serves kinda nobody, not the newcomer nor the fan. Another similar example of this is The Last of Us Remake. Some reviewers focused on the price tag, which they thought was too high. Others just saw a better version of the original and gave it a better score because of it. All of this is not even including that most gaming sites have questionable standards at times and don't pay much, which in turn gives the writer less reason to care about the final product, or that gaming journalists often aren't professionals but some guy that played a bunch of games and now claims to be a professional. By that I mean that almost none of them have an idea how games work or what good game design actually means. Which again would be fine if they wouldn't be put on such a pedestal. Because without special knowledge, except for maybe writing skills, what's the difference between me writing a review and a so-called professional if the sole qualification is having a passion for games? None of them are asking for industry knowledge, except for maybe Bloomberg. They're either incredibly vague, what is premium content supposed to mean? Apparently plagiarism. Others fall into the same pitfall as Kotaku. Google is onto something here. Is any of this Metacritic's fault? No, of course not. However, it still attacks the validity of Metascores. I'm sorry Metacritic, life isn't always fair. Step 2. Convert scores into a 0 to 100 scale system. This brings the chance of distorting the reviewer's intent. That's, by the way, why there are always so many 100, 90, 80 scores and not 81, 96 or 73s. This in turn gives some publications the chance of impacting the score more by having the full scale at their portfolio, while others can only give 100, 90, 80, 70, yes we get it. Other sites like Eurogamer aren't included at all because they don't give scores, instead words like essential or recommended. Now this seems like a total mess, doesn't it? So Metacritic thought to itself and came up with step 3. What if we weighted publications on how reliable they are? Depending on our subjective view, they would get to impact the score more or less. Again, this only makes things worse, so people took it upon themselves to find out how Metacritic weighs publications. And one possible answer appeared in 2013 when Gamasutra wrote about a GDC panel by Adam Greenwood Erickson. In this article, they claimed that publications were put into 6 categories. This of course sparked controversy. What publication would like to see themselves on the bottom? So Metacritic made a statement. They are still as intransparent as possible, and even though this is a statement that literally just says, "Trust me bro, they're wrong," I have to agree with them. After looking at 50 scores from indie to AAA, from recent releases to games from 2013-14, when the original story broke news, and calculating the average scores, none of them changed more than 1 to 2 points at max. More often than not, scores didn't change at all. However, no matter how they turn it, it's always a bad look. The scores get greatly adjusted by Metacritic, that's worth criticizing. If they don't impact scores, their only thing that differentiates themselves from the rest actually has almost no worth. In the regard of weighting, there is also a conflict of interest. Ever heard of video games magazine GameSpot? Metacritic sure as hell has. Hard not to when you're owned by the same parent company, right? Step 4. Roll a dice and publish the number on it as a metascore. Then the score gets irrelevant by the end of the first month. How? Well, it's the fault of mysteriously patched in microtransactions post-launch or live service games in general. Okay, let's talk colors. To be precise, green, yellow and red. Scores under 75 and above 50 are yellow and under 50 red. Wouldn't it be a shame if your game got a 74 and that yellow color is on your game by just 1 point? It might even be the fault of the weighting system I mentioned earlier. I'm sure something like losing 1 point has never impacted the industry negatively. Oh. Many of you may already know about this story. Bethesda struck a deal with Obsidian Games. If Fallout New Vegas would rate an 85 or more on Metacritic, they would get a bonus. Fallout New Vegas ended up getting an 84, and Bethesda, the piece of shit it is, kept the money. This was fatal for Obsidian Games. They had to cancel a game and let people go because of 1 point. For the reviewers it was as well. They understandably didn't want to be accountable for a studio getting paid or not. Oh, I already hear you say, this isn't the case anymore. Say hello to Sony and Days Gone, a game that got a decent score of 71 and a good user score of 8.4. It probably sold more than 8 million copies. Probably. For Sony, an absolute disappointment. Not because of sales, no. But because the Metacritic wasn't great. According to the creative director John Garvin, this was one of the main reasons why a sequel was turned down by Sony. This is just the reality of Sony, he said. Metacritic's score is everything. If you're the creative director on a franchise and your game is coming out to a 70, you're not going to be the creative director on that franchise for very long. Nintendo also once flexed with their metascores during the Wii U era in an investors conference. To be fair, they don't seem to care anymore, good for them, I guess. Some studios also wouldn't hire you unless you worked on an 85 plus game. This might still be the case, nothing in this industry can surprise me anymore.
I take that back. A social credit system for developers is truly something I wasn't expecting. You worked on a game that is bad because of time constraints, lack of money, feature creep of the director, or monetization. Well, no matter the reason, here's your permanent mark that you shouldn't be hired. I mean, how fucking inhumane can you be to rate people on a 100 scale for their contribution on games, no matter how big or small their contribution was? They gave Miyamoto an 8 out of 10. Do I have to say more other than thank God they were bullied out of this idea?
There were also talks of Metacritic literally crashing game companies' stock. There must be some solution, right? The holy grail of video game criticism. No, take it out of my sight. User scores suffer from mostly the same problems, just extricated. If you're a professional reviewer, you at least try to be objective. A random person out there doesn't have to be fair, which leads to very emotionally based reviews, where it's either a 0 or a 10. Not only that, but review bombing is a thing nowadays. It's not always bad, there are reasons like aggressive monetization that in my opinion qualify to be review bombed, other times it's not. Like Astral getting review bombed because it's a Switch exclusive, despite it never existing without Nintendo's funding. And by the way, this is Nintendo's IP, not Platinum's. Little extra, Telltale developers were found out leaving reviews on their own games. Do with it what you want. This is a hard one, and you won't like the answer. We don't know. But we can make an informed guess. I looked at 4 studies for this one. In general, the consensus seems to be that there is a correlation between scores and sales. So that's the answer, right? Not so fast. A correlation itself isn't proof of anything. For example, the same can be observed with Steam user reviews, even more so than with Metacritic scores. There are 4 possible explanations for this correlation. 1. Metacritic is driving sales. 2. Metacritic is predicting sales. 3. It's just the game's quality or marketing. Or a combination of everything. What can be said for sure is that games under certain scores have growth barriers, except for a few outliers. On the other side, it's also not a guarantee that highly rated games sell well, they can still fail. Personally, I would say Metacritic lost a lot of its influence. That's the feeling I got from these studies. It's still part of a decision to buy a game or not, but it makes up a considerably smaller part of that decision than you might expect. Marketing, word of mouth, or what your favorite creator has to say about the game seems to be far more important these days. Metacritic ends up being more of a ditch comparison between console fanboys, which company has more highly rated games. If you really want to make an informed decision, replace Metacritic and use OpenCritic as a starting point. They are far more transparent, have a percentage of critics that recommend the game on top of the average score, no weighting system applied. You can even mark critics you trust, so if you have to rely on such scores, at least use OpenCritic. And if you can't get enough of my content for some godforsaken reason, here I tell you about bad stuff Nintendo did that is less known, and here I explain a logo you frequently see in games but probably don't know what it means. See ya!